It's back. Everything mounted. I got a nice new exhaust. Took about 30 hours of fabricating to get the wastegate and everything in. And we ended up with twin dual exhaust tips that are actually off a charger. So, yeah.
Now what are we gonna do?
I'm gonna rip the whole car apart again. Previously on our LS build, we got our HP tuners figured out, started tuning and got it running on the engine stand, brought it to the exhaust shop, got all the exhaust work done, and got it ready to bring the engine to the dyno. So this episode, we're bringing it to the dyno, painting up the engine so it looks pretty, and getting ready to put it right back in the Mercedes. Here we go. So we held you guys in suspense last week over what was wrong in the front cover here, and it's just the timing chain. No big deal. Kind of odd that it's this sloppy already. The teeth are very sharp. So we're gonna change. We got a new timing gear and chain set. If you're gonna replace them as a kit. Replacing one doesn't do any good because they all wear together, and just replacing one, the other worn chain or whatever will wear the gear. So to change the gear set, we have to take the oil pump off, but if you're just doing the camshaft, you can take the 3 bolts off and just pop the gear out and drop it down and change the camshaft without pulling the oil pump off. So here we go. Before we take things apart, we have the luxury of having the engine on the stand, so we can roll our engine upside down to keep the lifters in the heads, but the lifters do actually get pushed into their valleys and they stay there, but only if you rotate the cams with the rockers off. I'll show you guys how to pull the cam gear off without pulling the oil pump off, just to show you how to do it. What you want to do is rotate it a couple times around to push all the valve lifters into their valleys. They will stay there. And then just line up your timing mark on your cam so that it is pointing straight down. Now there's a mark on the crank underneath, and I'll show you that. Now you're able to pull the cam gear right off and just drop it down. And you can pull out your 4 bolts holding your cam in place and pop this gear back on again afterwards. And there's your oil pump. So once you pull your retainer plate off that holds your cam in, before you pull your cam out, you want to make sure that the valve lifters don't fall in. So even though you've rotated the cams and pushed them into the lifters, you can take a little flat bar, or this is just electric fencing, nice and stiff, and just pop it in these holes, and that will guarantee that the lifter won't fall out when you pull your camshaft out. I know we could just rotate the engine upside down and install the cam with the engine upside down, but this is for you guys who still have the engines in your vehicles. When you're pulling it out, just sticking an half-inch extension or something in the end of the cam makes it easier. You be very careful of those journals not to damage the journals. Don't force anything. There it is. So this cam is out of our 5.3 out of a 2006, but this one is out of an LS7 Corvette. And we bought this one used because it had 30,000 kilometers on it, and they wanted a more outrageous cam. The only difference is that we don't have the cam sensor at the back. Now we do need a cam sensor, so that will now have to go on the front with a different timing cover to put the sensor in at the front. For now, we can pop it in. If you're getting a brand new cam, you have to be careful of the break-in procedure and the oil that you put on here. You have to use like a Moly Lube or whatever they recommend on whatever cam you get. For this, because it's already broken in and it's already used, we can just put motor oil on it and that will suffice in popping it back in again. So here we go. So replacing the cam is probably the first and easiest mod you can do to a stock LS platform engine. Give it more air, allow more air to go in and out, keep the valves open longer and push them open farther. Very cheap way to gain 30, 40, 50, even 60 horsepower depending on how mild or wild you go, along with a tune to allow more fuel to go in because you're allowing more air to go in. So disassembly is very straightforward, but taking the heads off, it's very important that you do it in the right order, especially aluminum. When you tighten them, you start in the center and work your way out. But when you take them off, you start on the outside and work your way in. The top ones are very small. They don't matter as much. They only 22 foot-pounds, but the head bolts, very important. Don't loosen it all the way off, just crack it loose, take the pressure off, and that greatly reduces the risk of warping the head. Now, if a head gasket is blown, I always send the head out because it blew for some reason. Is the head warped? Is the head gasket bad? But this being a perfectly good engine and we're just studying it, just taking it off, checking it with a straight edge and feeler gauges should be enough to leave it alone. So there we go. Oh, there's already a clean one. I guess I don't need that. So once it's nice and clean, we want to put new valve springs in it. The point of new valve springs is that now we have a bigger cam in it with a longer duration. We need a tougher spring so there's more resistance to the spring to close the valves quicker. So this is about the smallest duty valve spring compressor that you want to use because the springs do have a lot of resistance on it. You can get one of these small valve spring compressors, but they're a pain and I really don't like using them. So use them as a last resort, but really try to aim for one of these. What it does is you just put the cup on the back of the valve and then close it around the valve at the top. Press the spring, pull out the keepers, set them down, open it up gently. There's your spring. So we can toss the spring so there's no mistake over which one is new and which one is old. So we're gonna pull the valves out, just take a look at it. This engine only has 130,000 K on it. A little bit of buildup on there. Just take that off with some emery cloth, and then we're gonna put those right back in again with new springs. I generally just once I have the valve in, I just give it a little taps to make sure that those tappets are seated. If even one comes off, the valve drops into the engine, and that's it for your engine. Now, this is important to just take your time and scrape everything off. I don't like ever using power tools or air tools to make the job go quicker because you run the risk of warping it or rounding the edges or whatever. So razor blade, emery cloth, and patience and time. So throw some rags inside the cylinders, and when you think everything's nice and clean, you do it all again. So the difference between head bolts and head studs, and do I need them? Well, if you're gonna boost it, it's always a good idea to use studs. And the reason for it is a bolt only has surface area on the threads at the bottom, whereas a stud has it on both ends. When you're tightening down a bolt, these bolts on the LSs are torqued to yield, and what that means is they tighten them and tighten it to a point where the steel does not return to its original shape, and that keeps the bolt from coming loose. So regardless, if you are building or doing head gaskets, you need to replace the bolts. If you are using the studs, now you're using the surface area of the threads that go into the block along with the surface area on the nut on the top of the head, essentially doubling your pounds per square inch. When you're installing the studs, it doesn't do any extra to torque it down. You need to be able to put the studs in by hand and then just leave them there. Put a little bit of oil on the threads. These already have oil in the packet, but what you want to do is just tighten it finger tight and leave it there. If you torque it down, the threads actually start stretching one way, and we actually want to stretch it the other way. Earlier models had shorter studs on the top on the outsides. The later models, since this block is a 2006, had the same size studs all the way around. So head gaskets, no matter which head gaskets you use, not even necessarily for this engine, generally they have top front written on it. This one you can't get backwards if you just put towards the front because you can't put the head gaskets on upside down. So before you get to this stage, you might want to paint your block. You might want to dress it up somehow. This block still didn't have all the little extra nubs cut off, and that's why I haven't painted it, mainly because I have to put the heads on and because our exhaust with the turbo is so tight, make sure that everything fits, then we'll cut all the little extras off. I'm sure I'm going to be hitting some sparks and some stuff here yet, so I'm going to put my heads on now, and then we'll paint it once all the welding and all the cutting and all that is done at the final touch. Remember, while this engine was in the car, we actually built an engine on the stand so that we didn't have to move things back and forth all the time, and a couple of those little pieces, I'll forget where they are until I bolt the exhaust up solid to this block. So we're going to go ahead and put our heads on now, and we'll get into that. So if you're using the original head bolts, throw them out, get new head bolts. But if you're sticking with bolts, the first torque is 22 foot-pounds, and that's straight across the board, working from the center on your way out. Then when you get to the larger bolts, the M12s, I believe, it goes an extra 90 degrees, and then for your first step, for your second step, it's an extra 90 degrees again, except for the two smaller studs on the outside. If you have the smaller studs, they go an extra 50 degrees. That's your torque to yield, and you're stretching those bolts. If you are doing studs, which we're doing, take 75 divided by 3, which is 20. First step is 20, 50, then 75. So 22 is the final torque for the outside. We'll do 22 across the board, then we'll do 50, then we'll do 75. After I'm done torquing everything, I do go over them one more time just to make sure that they weren't loosened in any way. See that one? The center one actually tightened another probably 5 degrees or so, so did that one. So it doesn't hurt to just go over it one more time. If you're blowing big horsepower, it's a good idea to get it up to temperature and torque it when it's hot. So depending on what make and what model, that's very common practice in the heavy equipment field, is getting it hot and retorquing it right away. So that's all there is to torquing. Here we go. So because we're moving our coil packs down below, we want a nice clean look on our valve covers. We just sanded it off with different grit, again, coarse to fine. And then the holes that held the coil packs on, we shaved them off. We're gonna go get these welded, filled with aluminum, and then a nice clean finished look. We want to drill out the holes too, just so that any dirt doesn't pop up while it's welding, because otherwise it'll look like crap.
And we're gonna grind them down and shine them up real nice.
There we go. So when you're torquing the rockers, tighten all the ones down that don't have any spring tension on it, turn it 360 degrees and tighten the rest of them. All right, we're gonna splash some paint on our LS, and I'm gonna do it with the heads on because I didn't want the as little chance of anything falling inside as possible. So we'll tape off the heads. I put the old cover back on the front. We have a new cover, timing cover with the cam sensor in the front here. And basically the sides here, just spend a couple hours knocking all the rust and scale off, wire wheeling it with a drill and a grinder. I took a wire brush and Varsol and scrubbed it down as best as I could, and then hit it with some brake clean or paint thinner to get any oil or any residue off yet. I'll epoxy prime it. Epoxy primer is like a glue, so it's an in-between thing to hold paint to something else. So we're gonna paint it silver or aluminum, just because we're building an LS, right? And LSs are aluminum, so might as well make it look aluminum. So then the intake, we're also gonna paint. I'm gonna paint the intake that color, something like that. I think that's a nice color, mainly because the hoses for the turbo are that same burgundy, and then they're also blue, so I'm gonna paint the fuel rail blue. I think that'll look really sharp, and then anything else under the hood, we'll see whatever color that needs to be. We'll probably end up polishing the intake pipes so they're shiny like the heads, and then the valve covers will also be polished, and we're gonna engrave them as well. And then after we paint it, we'll get back into the timing cover and assembling what needs to be assembled before we put it back in the Mercedes. So here we go. So I bought this intake used from a now customer, and it's got a texture on it. It also has overspray on it from when he must have painted something in his shop. So if you want to sand this texture off to have a smooth look, it is going to take hours and hours and hours. Starting with like 100 grit, working your way up to like 600 grit, high build primer, more sanding. So get ready for that. I don't even really like the smooth look that much. I'm okay with the texture, and I can't build a customer 8-10 hours to sand his intake for pretty looks. So we're gonna clean this one off really well, put some epoxy primer on it, and basically just splash paint on it. I'm gonna put some old injectors in it to cover the holes. I put an electronic throttle plate assembly on there because I'm not using those. I got lots of those. There we go. So with our LS7 cam, we now move the cam sensor from the rear to the front, and with that we have to get a new timing cover, a new timing gear set and chain, and shims to move the oil pump forward to make room for the double chain. What it doesn't come with is the gasket for the cam retainer, and generally these are okay as long as you can feel a little raised lip over the surface of the plate. But if you're worried at all, you can always put a little bit of silicone or RTV sealant on there, just a smooch. All it does is move the oil pressure from one bank to the other, but it is very crucial. So we'll do that. Now you got your plate in place with a little bit of silicone. Now these bolts, these Torx bolts go to 18 foot-pounds. Don't over torque because you run the risk of splitting the ends over. You can put a little bit of Loctite on it if you so wish, because we're boosting it and we put a new cam in it. That's exactly what we're gonna do. Just a dab, run them down, and torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Now on our timing gear, you'll see 0 on a keyway, but you can put it on different keyways. You've got R2 and A2, advanced 2 degrees, or 2 teeth, sorry, and retard 2 teeth. We're doing it 0, and then the 0 on the tooth lines up with the 0 on the cam gear, and they will be pointing at each other. The best way to put the chain on is to put your cam gear on first, line up your dowel, and then just rotate your cam into the right spot so the 0, the mark on the tooth lines up with the 0 here. Take it off. Put your chain on, lining up your mark, and then just putting it in place. Now the cam gear is 26 foot-pounds. After that, we put our drive on for our oil pump, and that should just slide right on. Now because our chain is wider, we need these shims that come in the timing cover to just bring the oil pan out a little bit. What that does is leave that much less threads going in, so we're also going to Loctite the bolts holding them in. Our engine was very low mileage. It was a city fleet truck, so we're not going to be too worried about replacing it because it's fairly new. I did throw some oil in it, wash it out, so more or less primed it. If you have a higher mileage engine, you might want to consider replacing your oil pan, or your oil pump, sorry. The oil pump bolts go to 18 foot-pounds. So to install the front balancer, you're gonna need a kit like this. We got this from Princess Auto, and all that does is take a 16mm by 2 thread, stick it in the crankshaft, and just bottom it out. And then it has this, it slides right over top, hits that, and then this nut is just able to pull it in. It's not a good idea to do it with the retaining bolt because it's a tight fit, so you gotta tap it on the crank, which is not a great, and then you run the risk of stripping the threads if you don't have enough threads on there. So that's a good way to do it. Once this is in, use the old bolt to torque it to 250 foot-pounds, then tighten your front cover, pull the bolt back out again, and replace it with a new bolt. Leaving the oil pan off is a good idea, so you can stick just a socket in between one of the crank throws and the side of the block, and that keeps the engine from turning one way or another while you're tightening and loosening the bolts. These two ribs here you can see are shiny because I've made this a 6-rib belt to drive the power steering pump, the AC compressor, and the water pump off this one, the alternator off of this one. So keep in mind that the Corvette water pumps run backwards, so my belt runs over this one and then comes around on the top. Spins the Corvette water pump the other way. So once you've drawn it in with an old bolt, take that one back out again, replace it with a new one, torque it to 37 foot-pounds, and then add another 140 degrees. And I always like this little tool here. I hook that on, you've seen me use that before. There's the important one. And so an extra 140 degrees, which is roughly that. That's only 100 degrees. So an extra. And 140. Now you can torque your timing cover to 18 foot-pounds. So now that we have our timing cover tight, we can now tighten our rockers. We'll go to the top there. So at top dead center number 1, you can tighten the exhaust rocker bolts to 22 foot-pounds on number 1, 2, 7, and 8, and tighten the intake rockers on number 1, 3, 4, and 5. Then you got to rotate the engine a full 360 degrees and tighten the rocker bolts on number 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then the intake rockers on number 2, 6, 7, and 8. And then once they're all tight, go over it all over again and just retighten. Doesn't matter, they're already tightened down, just in case you forgot one. So here we go. Water pump bolts are 11 foot-pounds the first pass, and then 22 the second pass. So we didn't torque down the intake just yet. We just kind of snugged it up just because we're gonna run our loom underneath. But the injectors work a lot better if you just put a little bit of Vaseline just on the O-ring, just to slide it in. It works much better. Exhaust manifolds get torqued to 11 foot-pounds and then 22 foot-pounds. Start from the center, work your way out. So we're gonna wrap our exhaust, mainly because things are pretty tight under our engine hood there. We got containing the heat inside works better for the turbo, but it also keeps things from melting from under the hood. Best advice is to start with your longest piece. If you've got different variations like us, this gets pretty complicated and it's hard to tell exactly because you need to wrap it tighter to get around the individual ports. But if you start with the longest one and you're too short, hopefully it'll fit on the shorter one. If not, just leave yourself lots extra. So to start off with, we want to fold a corner over and tuck that underneath. That will keep the ends from fraying. So just start on one end there, and then basically just pull it as tight as you possibly can all the way to the end. Overlapping about 1/3 every time. If it's not very pliable, you can wet it. A lot of the newer stuff you don't have to wet anymore. If Aaron was doing this, he'd probably have to wet it because he's got little girly hands. So we skipped a couple of steps there just because it's only pertinent to our engine, but you got the idea of the assembly. This is basically how it'll go back into the car, minus the intake and the exhaust. We'll put that on while it's there. So wrapping the exhaust is pretty straightforward and really simple. What bothers me is that they know that you need stainless steel ties to start and finish the wrap, and they don't send it with them. So we got our exhaust wrap, we are waiting for steel ties. You want stainless steel ties to finish off that wrap to keep it from unraveling. They will be on there. I know there's zip ties on there right now, but that's just until the stainless steel ties come in. You think anybody in Dunnville's got them? No. Drove around, made calls, nobody has stainless steel ties. So here we go.
Look at that. Beautiful day. Hey, what's that?
That's another LS. Oh, hey. Where are we going with this? Let's hook it up.
So here was our plan originally. We've got our very good engine here that has low mileage and very good shape, but we ran into a few snags, nothing major. A big thing that happened was the exhaust shop dumped the wastegate in the wrong direction. They were heading it back to the turbo again. Not good, because you'll have two forces going against each other. So we had to bring that section of the exhaust back, and they actually looped it around, did a really nice job on it, but one of the flanges was back ordered. We had to wait a couple weeks for that. It happens. In doing so, we lost our spot on the dyno, and that happens. The dyno shop is extremely busy. Dale does good work there at DSE Auto. So we lost our turn on the dyno. Those little snags are just little things that we run into, mainly because we don't have a lot of suppliers here. Everybody's new to this LS stuff. We had to wait for our timing cover for the cam sensor at the front. All little stuff, it takes time, but we're getting it figured out. Tousley Auto Wrecker sponsors us now, and we thought it'd be neat if we could take an LS engine to the dyno shop, tune it, get it running, and basically blow it up, give it boost, and give it fuel until it blows up. Now, in theory, that was nice, and we're kind of going with our sloppy mechanics. You know, these LS engines are bulletproof, and they're going to last forever. Pick one up at the junkyard, and it's going to work. We had an older engine, we didn't know much about it, and that's exactly what we wanted. Nothing worth any money, but still running and whatever. It sounded good when we had it on the engine stand. We moved our intake over, we put our cam inside of it. We didn't put head studs in it, and we didn't put springs on it. We figure a little bit of valve float at the top end, no big deal. Something's gonna let go, and we hope it's gonna be around 500 horse. We're about to run this 5.3 on this dyno here, and we're sponsored by Motomaster Formula, and their recommendation for this was the lowest grade oil that we could possibly get. For this is 4 or 5 liters, runs about $20, and that's basically because we don't give a shit about this engine. We're really just gonna go blow it up. We just need to get a tune roughly for around 450, figure out the tuning on our HP tuners, and then most of this stuff is going to a good engine. So here we go. No funnel, just like. Oh, look at that. You got something to learn, Engine Masters. 0, but he hasn't
Giving it throttle,
so maybe one of the coil packs quit and started filling up the exhaust there on the right with fuel, so it started popping right away. So luckily, thanks to Tousley, gave us a spare engine a while ago, so we stripped quite a bit off of that engine already. We got 16 volt power there, right? But then the ground is only when it fires, right? 76.
So it's pin 36 blue, not 76, and I marked it here. And I marked it as 76, so it should be 36. It's my dyslexia. Dyslexia. Cut that out.
Pump is turning too slow, so we're starting to overheat, but we should be able to get a pull in yet, so here we go. That's a lot of noise. Unfortunately, it let go at 310 horse, which happened at a very lower RPM, but high boost. We had 10 pounds going to it, and a little head gasket went, and when we checked it, it was low in compression on a couple cylinders when we got it back. We should have done the compression test first, although I'm glad we did it this way. If we leaned it out with too much boost, we can easily burn a hole in the piston. We don't want that. So what we did was tear that engine back down again, figure out what went wrong, and now we're comfortable with the tune that we have to get it running and start tuning it while it's in the car. Unfortunately, the dyno can only put a load on the engine, and it doesn't really simulate a driving experience. It doesn't simulate shifting from first to second and all through your other gears, uphill, downhill, coasting, quick off, quick on the throttle. All it really does is put a giant load on it and test the engine to the max. Now that's great for a carbureted engine because you really can only set your fuel one way. It works on the vacuum, you get more air flowing through, you get more fuel, but that's a very simple way that works. You can't change any of that. The LS computers, and with the ECU and the O2 sensors, think of it as a giant spreadsheet where every different scenario of load and air coming in, it's able to calculate how much fuel is going in there. We need to populate that graph. So I would do everything again the same, other than that we should have had a little better of an engine to practice on that could actually put out the full numbers. So this is where we're at. We got our engine idling very nicely. We had it sounding awesome on the dyno until we saw a little puff off the right bank, and that was pretty well it. We couldn't get any more out of the engine. We ran out of time because we had a couple snags and a coil backfiring or grounding out. We also had the idle air solenoid wasn't communicating, so we had to track one of those down. All of that takes a few hours here and there where we're not really close to anything major. Part supplier, everything takes time. So we lost our time on the dyno, but we still got enough to get it running, get it idling, and getting it sounding pretty sweet. So what we're gonna do now is put this engine, we put the camshaft back in this one, we're gonna put the intake and everything on this one, we painted it up, we're gonna put it in the car, we're gonna drive it, get our driving tune on it, pretty well drive it for the summer. It's gonna take a while to get all the last little bugs out because this is a one of a kind, new to everybody in the area here, and then we'll probably pull the engine back out again and bring it to the dyno and get some actual numbers. We're gonna pay for that because we need to have those numbers to say, okay, this engine does put out this much without putting a giant strain on the rest of the drivetrain, wrecking the rest of the car. It's not the point of this build. So I hope that's enough of an explanation as to why it took so long for another LS build. We are working on it steady, but we also have other jobs on the go. You've seen the shop tour and that. We will get there. We will have another video next week because this thing will be running inside the Mercedes next week. Thanks for watching. Here we go. I still think that we should have. Let me see how dirty they are. Yeah, and all of them are like that. And then it's funny that the left bank push rods look like that, and the right bank are nice and clean. It's kind of peculiar. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that before. But yeah, I still think we should have got more power even with it having that much blow by. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon. There's a lot of stuff happening there to help support the channel. And remember, if you're not filthy, you're not rich.